paying those on the front lines of health care. That's what lawmakers say is the goal of a new direct pay bill. Hear from a lawmaker and ambulance service company on the impact this will have. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Lawmakers continuing their calls for the governor to sign legislation that would change the way first responders are being paid. Now, the direct pay bill would require health insurance companies to reimburse all ambulance services immediately, regardless of whether or not the company accepts the patient's insurance. Currently, insurance companies send the money to the patient. However, it does not always make its way to that ambulance company, which some say is making it difficult for them to stay afloat.
In rural communities, we depend on these services very, very heavily as the front line of healthcare. So when these ambulance services, when EMS services go down or have to temporarily close the doors, that comes at a great loss to these communities.
Joining us now to explain the push to get this bill passed is Assemblyman Phil Steck, representing the 110th District. Jay Tyler, Director of Guilderland EMS. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Explain, this is a problem I didn't even know existed out there. I don't know how I missed this all these years. Explain what this direct pay bill does and why it's important. I mean, I'll hit you with the bill first, Phil.
So it's really pretty simple that if someone in your family gets taken by ambulance or EMS to the hospital, you end up being billed by the EMS, and generally it's a large amount, and the insurance companies were refusing to take direct billing from the EMS on the grounds that they didn't have a contract with EMS. And from the EMS perspective, there's so many insurance companies and they don't really know who the insurers are, the person that they're transporting. So it was a very confusing process, and also it left them without payment because a lot of times they'd bill the patient and the patient just wouldn't pay. There was no incentive for them to do it. So what the law does is say you don't have to have a relationship with a particular insurance company to bill it for these services.
So putting this in layman's terms, if you go, but people don't understand, you go to the dentist and the bill's $500, insurance company almost always sends the insurance company, they say, well, we're going to pay $400 of the $500. Then the dentist gets paid and sends you a bill for $100, and you owe the dentist $100. With this, a big check of some sort was going to a person versus the ambulance company?
Well, the bill would go to the person, and they invariably wouldn't pay it, and then the EMS would be out the money and not getting reimbursed, which was a burden on the taxpayers because EMS is publicly funded. So under this system, they'll be able to send their bill directly to the patient's insurer, who will have to pay the bill even if they have no insurance relationship with the EMS. Even the EMS is not going to be a participating provider in the insurance.
Well, let's bring in Jay. How important is this to you? I mean, this isn't like one ambulance ride a week. This is a lot of money, right?
This is very important to us. Over the past 12 months, we have lost $57,400. And either, the patient, it's kind of a cumbersome process for the patients to understand that the check may get sent to them. They in turn have to forward it to the EMS agency. Some folks don't have the wherewithal to do that. And particularly in the rural communities, patients shouldn't have to worry about whether their ambulance service is a provider, a participating provider or not. Most EMS agencies operate on the margin. They're supported by taxpayer insurance. They're made of municipal agencies, not-for-profit, commercial insurance, all rely heavily on insurance reimbursement. They're part of the healthcare system and are entitled to that money.
It seems too like you're just asking for trouble if, and Phil was pointing out there may be no check, but if there is a check and it goes to a person and they've got rent to pay or groceries to buy, they say, well, I appreciated that ride that day, but we need food in the fridge, so I'm going to take half of this or all of it and spend it. I'm not wasting it. And you can almost rationalize in their mind, I'm not wasting the money. Oh, I'm sure the ambulance corps wouldn't mind if I bought a steak. But you guys got to get paid too.
Well, reimbursement directly affects the patient. It directly affects the community. We use insurance funding for fuel, for tires, for medical supplies, for equipment. That in turn gets related to the patient and in turn the community. The EMS agencies are a big part of the community. And the COVID, we essentially acted as the public health entity.
Sure.
So a strong EMS system benefits the patient and benefits the community.
And Phil, did I read right, this passed both houses unanimously?
Yes, it's waiting for signature by the governor.
Do you know what the holdup is? Is it just on a big stack of stuff? I know she's been busy with other things, but
She will get some lobbying probably from private insurance companies, because even though they are responsible to the patient, this enables them to avoid some of those payments. It is in fact sad that they might question this, but there has been some of that lobbying in the past. Whether there will be this time, I don't know. The time between a bill being presented to the governor and when it's actually signed is somewhat of a mystery to me, but this would be one that it would shock me if it weren't signed by the governor.
yeah, I could see an insurance company almost having a reflex of rejecting you hear pay this and they go, nah. And a person has no skin in the game now. They already got their ride. But if they send it to, Gildan EMS and they say, no, you're going to come back at them and say, well, wait a second, here's the reasons why, and you're going to probably fight for that money, probably a little harder, I would imagine, than a person who, again, they already had the service taken care of.
There's a usual and customary rate for EMS services. And it shouldn't cost the insurance companies anymore to send the check directly to the EMS agencies. Either going to send it to the patient or they're going to send it to the EMS agency. It shouldn't affect premiums. It should just be sent right to the provider like it is other professional healthcare.
Are you still having, years ago we did stories where on how people were using your services almost like a taxi. Is that still an issue, or have we gotten away from that where people are, my foot's swollen, I'm going to call the ambulance, and then again, you guys it's expensive, and you don't want to say no.
We're in a, post-COVID, we're in a kind of a different state of affairs. The healthcare system is kind of in crisis with the overcrowding in the emergency departments. Folks aren't getting to primary care, they're not getting to specialists. Sometimes EMS is the only reliable healthcare they have. They dial 911. They wait till their medical conditions get exacerbated to the point where they have to dial 911. Not to say that there aren't some that dial 911 frequently, shall we say, but we see is more and more the 911 calls are more acute. They're more serious. They're more severe, and I think that has to do with lack of health care with primary care and specialty.
Sure. Phil, all the lobbying aside, do you think this gets signed, or is it a flip of the
It would shock me if it didn't get signed.
And again, do you think it'll be by the end of the year? When will this take effect, right away?
It should happen by the end of the year, and yes, it would take effect thereafter.
All right, well, we wish you luck with both of this. I know you both want to see this go through, and we'll wait and see if maybe the governor's watching right now at home. And she can,
Hopefully.
Where's that bill? I know it was somewhere.
It would not be a good public relations thing for the governor to veto this bill.
No, gotcha. All right, guys, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. A proposed change would alter the way smaller school districts are operating around the state. When we come back, we'll hear from the Executive Director of the Rural Schools Association on how getting rid of debt limits could impact those small school districts. Quick reminder, if you have a story idea, a comment, please let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X, which all of us still call Twitter. That's at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. A proposed amendment to the state constitution could impact the number of schools across the state. When you vote next month, you'll see on the ballot Proposition 1 for Prop 1. If approved, it would eliminate the special debt limit for small city school districts. Now, instead, debt limits would be established in state law for all school districts, big or small. Currently, the state law limits the amount of debt that a small city school district can incur to less than 5% of the value of taxable real estate in that district. So a small district is defined as one that includes at least part of a small city, and a small city is defined as one with a population of less than 125,000. If this constitutional amendment is passed, small city school districts would be eligible for the first time to have the same debt limit as the other bigger school districts. Proposition 1 would have an impact on how smaller schools operate. To give an idea on what that impact would be, we're joined by David Little, Executive Director of the Rural Schools Association. Welcome, David.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Before we get into the topic at hand, what is the Rural Schools Association? Is the name obvious what you do? You represent the smaller school districts?
We do. About half of the school districts in the state, we have about 300 member districts that consider themselves to be rural. Some that you wouldn't necessarily think of as rural. They might be small city school districts who have a rural area that they incorporate around them. But we provide advocacy and information and professional development, all of those types of things.
Now, I'm guessing you're behind this this Prop 1. Explain what it is to, in layman's terms, to somebody who, if their mind glaze over numbers, explain this 5% versus 10% in borrowing, how it works.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, actually. All of the school districts in the state, except for 57 school districts that are in small cities, they all have a 10% limit on how much they can borrow. And the 10% is 10% of the property value within their school district. That's a legal limit that's done in statute, that the legislature passed a law signed by the governor that did that. These 57 school districts in small cities have half of that amount as their debt limit, only 5%, which is a holdover in our state constitution from the days when the public didn't vote on their school budgets and we didn't have a tax cap. So now that we have those two types of controls over all voting on school budgets, this 5% limit really is inequitable because it's different than all of their peers. They can raise, in essence, half the money, and many of these school districts are some of the most financially needy in our state.
And to put it in the simplistic terms, so, you know, an example, if a bigger city had $100 million, but that's just a low number, let's say they had $100 million of property value, they could borrow up to $10 million to do work within the schools, correct? That's the 10%? That's how that number would work?
Yeah, that's correct. The problem is that 10%, when you've got to do anything major, fix roofs or, you know, that structural things, is very difficult. And the difference between their limit and the limit on everybody else really has to do with the fact that if a school district that's not in a city, let's say they borrow $10 million, well, they may get, you know, $7,500,000 of that back,
right,
because they have a ratio that allows the state to pay them back, to reimburse them for most of that money. Only the part that's not reimbursed counts against that debt limit for all cities or for all districts except for small city school districts. So if a small city decides that they want to borrow money, all of the $10 million project would count against their cap, even though 75% of it would be reimbursed.
And with these smaller, you said sometimes these are districts with some poverty. What's happening now with the 5% that they're limited? Are they looking at replacing the roofs or replacing furnaces and saying, guys, you know, we can't borrow enough money to do it, so we have to break it up into multiple years? What's happening? Are things just not getting done?
Well, that's really the case because it costs so much money to try and do major improvements that they simply haven't done them. And so these children, and just to give you an example, the statewide average for students in poverty in a school district is 35%. In small cities, it's over 60%. So they have some of the highest needs in our state, and yet they're restricted in what they can do. If they want to put in a new science lab, even though their voters agreed to pay for it, they can't do it because of this constitutional hangover that we have from the days when the public had no control over the voting for their budget.
You know, unfortunately, people walk into the voting booth uneducated, and I can see somebody who knows nothing about this issue thinking either, A, they see that somebody wants to raise a debt limit, oh, they just want to borrow more money and raise my taxes more, or they want to borrow all this money and give raises to teachers or buy things that they don't need. That's not what this is about, right?
Well, in fact, they can't do it it's their borrowing limit. There are laws on what you can borrow things for schools. You can't do it for things like raises. Has to be a capital project. And in fact, the state will reimburse the vast majority of it. What folks need to know about this is that right now it's extremely unfair. You have our school districts, depending upon where you live, treated completely differently than everybody else. So the small cities folks have got the ability to spend only half on their schools, on their students, in terms of their borrowing that everybody else has. So it's really about not giving them something extra. It's about allowing everybody to have the same rules.
Do they just need this one vote to go through, or is this one of those situations where you need two different legislatures to put it up and have the voters say yes twice? This is a one-time yes?
Yeah, it's been passed by the legislature twice, which allowed it to be put on the ballot. Now, if the public funds it, or if the public approves it, then the limit would be changed. The legislature, the other control that people need to know when they vote for this is that the legislature has already passed a bill and the governor has already signed it, saying that if this constitutional change is approved by the voters, that small cities would have a 10% limit. So just because you're removing the 5% limit doesn't mean that they'll have no limit. It means that they'll have the same 10% limit as all other schools.
And Dave, if I'm in a big school district, does this, I'm allowed, number one, I'm allowed to vote on this, right, even though it doesn't impact me, and number two, does it even affect me financially? It just, explain that part. Everybody votes on this and it only affects the smaller, right?
Yeah, we're really voting on something. If you don't live in one of these 57 small cities, it won't affect you directly. It's really because it's in our state constitution and everyone needs to vote on a constitutional change. And so we need everybody to vote to allow the people in these districts to have the same control over their budget by voting independently, by having the same 10% debt limit as the people who are voting on it statewide.
All right, Dave Little, we'll have to leave it there. Executive Director of Rural School Association, Prop 1. Look for it on your ballot when you vote in a couple of weeks here. Thank you for coming on today, Dave.
My pleasure. Thanks, John.
Moving along, Governor's recent trip to Israel drawing attention from the State Ethics Commission. In a moment, when we come back, we'll have details on who funded the trip and the mission behind it as the investigation nears its end. If you got a comment or story idea, please let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X, formerly known as Twitter. WTEN is where you'll find us. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Questions remain following Governor Kathy Hochul's trip to Israel. The state's Ethics Commission reviewing the nonprofit that paid for that trip. The commission tasked with ensuring that the arrangement that sent the governor to Israel following all ethics laws here in the state. While we know that the nonprofit that paid for that trip works with the Jewish community, that Hochul administration had yet to release its name. The governor explaining that the state only paid for her security detail.
The state police costs are picked up by the state of New York for security, and we literally just arrived 6 a.m. Friday morning, so I cannot say what the total calculation is for that right now.
Governor explained the mission of the trip was to show support for Israel, as New York has the highest Jewish population outside of that country in the whole world. Melissa DeRosa, if the name sounds familiar, it should. She served as secretary and top aide to former Governor Andrew Cuomo before she and he both resigned amid a scandal involving sexual harassment, an ethically questionable book deal for millions, and alleged mishandling of nursing homes and COVID deaths. Well, DeRosa is discussing those many elements of her political career in her new book. It's a memoir called What's Left Unsaid. DeRosa giving a full-throated defense of hers and Andrew Cuomo's actions during the pandemic and blames much of the criticism aimed at her on a hostile media. Sometimes, she says, just goes with the territory.
Everyone is entitled to have a position on what happened. And for a number of years, I was batted around like a piñata by the press. And there were a lot of things that were said about me that were not true. And there were a lot of things said about the administration that were not true. And the same way that I get to tell my story, I respect that other people have different views and they're going to have their own criticisms. And it is what it is. You get into the boxing ring, you expect to get punched in the face, but you're in the ring to fight back.
DeRosa added that the Me Too movement was weaponized to force Cuomo out of office, and she says the Attorney General's report into the sexual harassment case against him was, quote, full of lies. She also says that she is not done with politics. Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. If you have a comment or story idea, let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X, which we used to call Twitter. Our handle is WTEN. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, lawmakers announcing new legislation with the goal of changing how kids and teens are interacting with social media. The governor explaining this week how the Stop Addictive Feeds Exploitation, or SAFE for Kids Act, would protect children from what she calls the harmful impact of social media.
The data around the negative effects of social media on these young minds is irrefutable. And knowing how dangerous these algorithms are, I will not accept that we are powerless to do anything about it. Like I said, we prohibit cigarettes and alcohol. Teenagers can't have access to them because it's a threat to their health. I'm telling you, these algorithms are a threat to their health as well.
Next week, we'll be hearing from an expert in child psychology on the impact social media can have on those kids. For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray in Albany. We'll see you right here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across the great state of New York.